Hello and welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Before we begin, I'd love it if you could share in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always a joy to see people tuning in from different corners of the world and at different moments in their day or night. I also want to take a gentle moment to thank those of you who have already subscribed to this channel and who keep pressing that little like button on the videos that you find most valuable. It truly helps me know what resonates with you, and it helps others find these calming spaces too. And if you ever have ideas or topics you'd like me to explore in future videos, please feel free to suggest them in the comments. Your thoughts and inspirations are always welcome here. So, with that said, let's begin. The ancient Earth slept beneath a sky painted in soft, lavender hues, its surface a cool, dark expanse where the first raindrops fell like gentle whispers from the heavens. 4.1 billion years ago, the planet was a world of quiet transformation. No life yet had stirred the deep. No breath of oxygen had touched the oceans. Only the slow, rhythmic pulse of tectonic shifts and the steady dance of water over rock created a world that felt ancient and tender, like a child dreaming of something vast and unformed. The air was thick with methane and ammonia, a scent like the earth after a long rain, and the oceans were vast, dark, and still, holding the potential for everything that would follow. In this quiet space, the building blocks of life were already forming, though no one knew it yet. They were simply molecules, drifting in the primordial soup, waiting for the right moment to become something more. Imagine a time when the sun was a dimmer, warmer light, casting long shadows across the water. In those deep, cool waters, simple organic molecules began to gather, drawn together by the gentle pull of gravity and the slow release of energy from the planet's core. This was the beginning of a story that would unfold in the quiet spaces between the stars. Scientists tell us that the first experiments, like those conducted by Stanley Miller in the 1950s, showed how lightning strikes and volcanic activity could combine basic elements into amino acids, the building blocks of proteins. Miller's work was a quiet revelation, a simple demonstration that life's ingredients could arise from the Earth's own quiet processes. He described it this way: the universe, in its patient way, provides the raw materials for life without needing a special creator. It was a profound idea, one that felt almost like a whisper from the Earth itself. In that primordial soup, the molecules moved slowly, like a dance of the stars, seeking the right partners to form more complex structures. There was no rush, no urgency, only the gentle, persistent rhythm of nature turning the simple into the extraordinary. As we look deeper into this quiet history, we find that the earliest life might not have arisen in the open oceans at all. Instead, it could have begun in the deep, dark places where the Earth's heat met the ocean, creating a world of gentle warmth and mineral richness. These hydrothermal vents, hidden beneath the sea, are like living cradles of life, their plumes of steam and minerals releasing energy in a way that sustains delicate ecosystems. In these vents, the water was warm, rich with dissolved minerals, and the pressure was steady, creating a stable environment where life could take root without the chaos of the surface world. Scientists like Dr. Robert Hazen have studied these environments and say, the vents offer a quiet, stable world where simple molecules could form without the need for sunlight or the harsh conditions of the open ocean. It was a place of gentle transformation, where the Earth's heat and the ocean's movement worked together to create a world that felt both ancient and alive. Here, the first cells might have formed, not as sudden explosions of energy, but as slow, steady processes, like the slow growth of a seed in the dark soil. The story of life's origins also involves a molecule that was more than just a simple chemical. It was the first self-replicating system. This molecule, RNA, holds the key to how life began. It can both store genetic information and catalyze chemical reactions, making it a perfect candidate for the first living system. Think of it as a tiny, self-sustaining machine that could copy itself with remarkable precision. Researchers like Dr. Jack Szostak have worked to understand this process, and he has said, RNA was the first bridge between chemistry and biology. It was the first step toward life, a quiet moment when molecules began to think for themselves. In the deep, dark waters of the vents, RNA molecules might have formed, their strands twisting and uncoiling in the gentle currents. They were not complex, not yet alive, but they were a step toward something more. They were the first whispers of life, the quiet beginning of a story that would one day become the vast tapestry of life we know today. What happened next? How did these simple molecules become the first living cells? It was a process that unfolded slowly, like the rise of a tide. The RNA molecules started to interact with each other, forming chains that could replicate themselves with increasing accuracy. This was the birth of the first self-sustaining systems, protocells, tiny membrane-bound structures that could capture energy and grow. They were not yet alive in the way we understand life today, but they were the first steps toward life as we know it. In these early cells, the molecules worked together in a quiet, harmonious way, like a symphony playing in the dark. They were fragile, but they were resilient. They could survive the slow shifts in the environment, adapting to the gentle changes that came with the Earth's ancient rhythms. Here is where we must ask ourselves, what made this process possible? Was it the right temperature, the right minerals, the right timing? The answer lies in the quiet, patient work of the Earth itself. The first cells did not appear suddenly. They emerged from a long, slow dance of chemistry and physics. They were shaped by the Earth's own quiet processes, by the slow release of heat from the planet's core, by the gentle movement of water, by the steady rhythm of time. This was not a story of chaos or destruction, but of quiet emergence. The Earth was patient, and so were the molecules. They did not need to be loud or dramatic. They needed only to be present, to move with the Earth's rhythm. In this way, life began not with a bang, but with a whisper, a quiet, almost imperceptible shift in the molecular world. Think of it like this. The first living cells were not born in a single moment, but over a long, gentle period. They were the result of countless interactions, each one a quiet step toward something new. They were fragile, yet they held the potential for everything that would follow. They were the first steps in a journey that would eventually lead to the vast diversity of life we see today. This process was not a sudden event, but a slow, steady unfolding, like the growth of a seed in the dark soil. The Earth did not rush to create life. It allowed it to form in its own time, in its own way. As we sit here, listening to the quiet hum of the universe, we can imagine that the first living cells were born in a place of deep calm. They were not afraid of the dark, nor did they need the light of the sun. They simply existed in the quiet spaces between the stars, in the gentle currents of the Earth's own energy. They were a reminder that life does not always need to be loud or visible. It can grow in the quiet, in the shadows, where the Earth's rhythms are strongest. This is the story that the first living cells told, a story of patience, of quiet emergence, of the Earth's gentle hands shaping the world. And so, as we move forward, we carry this quiet understanding with us. The next chapter of this story will reveal how these early cells grew, how they learned to adapt, and how they eventually gave rise to the vast web of life we know today. But for now, the Earth remains quiet, and the story of life's beginning is still a whisper in the dark, a gentle reminder that even the smallest beginnings can become the most profound stories. The first living cells did not shout, they simply existed in the quiet spaces between the stars. They were a quiet beginning, a gentle promise that life could emerge from the Earth's own quiet heart. The ancient seas, thick with the scent of hydrothermal vents, whispered secrets to the first life forms that stirred in the deep. Imagine water so hot it could melt stone, oceans so acidic they burned the skin of the earliest organisms, and skies so dark they held no stars, only the faint glow of chemical reactions. This was the world when life began, not as a sudden flash of light, but as a slow, persistent dance of molecules in the primordial soup. Billions of years ago, simple single-celled organisms emerged from the chaos of Earth's early atmosphere, their membranes thin and fragile, their genetic material a tangled web of DNA. They were not yet alive as we understand it, but they were the first living things, prokaryotes, breathing fire and heat from the planet's core. These early organisms faced a world that was constantly shifting. The Earth was a planet of fire and ice, its surface a violent dance of volcanic eruptions and freezing storms. The first life forms clung to the edges of this harsh reality, finding refuge in the deep ocean where the pressure was immense, but the heat was steady. They did not need sunlight. They fed on the chemicals released by the planet's own furnace, a process called chemosynthesis. Think of it like this. Imagine a tiny creature living in a dark cave, drinking warm water from a geothermal spring, turning the energy of steam and minerals into food. This was how life survived when the sun had not yet risen in the sky. The organisms were simple, almost like living rocks, but they were alive in the most fundamental way, reproducing, adapting, and enduring. As the Earth cooled, the first life forms had to change too. The oceans became less acidic, the temperatures dropped, and the planet's atmosphere began to stabilize. But even then, the changes were slow and steady, like the turning of a single leaf in the wind. These early organisms developed remarkable resilience. They grew stronger membranes to withstand the shifting pH levels. Their genetic material became more stable so they could pass on traits that helped them survive. One scientist, Dr. Carl Woese, who discovered the 3 domains of life, once said, "The first life forms were not just survivors, they were pioneers, building the foundation for everything that follows." He meant that these organisms weren't passive victims of change. They actively shaped their world, one adaptation at a time. They learned to live with the heat, the cold, the light, and the dark. The most dramatic shift came when the Earth's atmosphere began to change. Oxygen, once a rare gas, started to accumulate in the air, a process that took place over hundreds of millions of years. This was the Great Oxidation Event, a time when the planet's atmosphere transformed from a reducing environment to one rich in oxygen. For the first time, life had to adapt to a new reality. Oxygen was now abundant, and it was not just a gas, but a powerful force. Many of the early organisms, which had thrived in an oxygen-free world, began to die. But not all. Some developed ways to use oxygen as an energy source, turning it into fuel for their cells. Others, like the ancestors of today's bacteria, evolved to live in the deep ocean where oxygen levels were low. They became the first organisms that could thrive in both oxygen-rich and oxygen-poor environments, a skill that would later become crucial for life on land. This adaptation was not random. It was a careful, step-by-step process, like learning to walk for the first time. The early organisms had to develop new mechanisms to handle oxygen, enzymes that could process it without causing damage, protective layers that shielded their cells from oxidative stress. They did not become multicellular, but they became more complex in their own way. Their internal structures grew more intricate, their genetic codes more stable, and their ability to respond to environmental changes improved. This was the essence of evolution in action, a slow, steady dance of survival and adaptation. As Dr. Jennifer Wasserlich, a leading researcher in early life, explained, the first organisms didn't just survive the changes, they learned to live alongside them, turning each shift into an opportunity. The Earth's environment kept shifting, and so did life. The oceans became warmer, the continents drifted, and the atmosphere changed again. But the early organisms were resilient. They adapted to the new conditions by developing new metabolic pathways, by creating more efficient ways to capture energy from their surroundings. They grew more specialized, but they never lost their connection to the deep, dark waters where they began. Their stories are written in the rock layers beneath our feet, in the fossil records that tell of a world where life was both fragile and incredibly strong. One of the most fascinating aspects of this early life is how it responded to the planet's changes without ever becoming multicellular. These organisms were single-celled, yet they were capable of remarkable complexity. They had internal structures that worked together in harmony, like a tiny city within a single cell. They could sense changes in their environment and react quickly, adjusting their behavior to survive. This adaptability was the key to their success. They did not need to be large or numerous. They needed to be resilient and flexible. As Dr. Thomas Brock, who discovered extremophiles in hydrothermal vents, remarked, the first life forms were not the strongest or the fastest, they were the most patient. They waited for the right moment, then acted with precision. The Earth's changes were not always gentle. There were periods of extreme heat, sudden acid rain, and violent storms that threatened to erase life entirely. But the organisms that survived were the ones that had already learned to adapt. They had developed mechanisms to repair damage, to recycle energy, and to pass on the traits that helped them endure. This was life's most profound lesson, that change is inevitable, but adaptation is always possible. The first organisms did not fight the changes, they embraced them, turning each challenge into a new opportunity. Think about it. What if you were an early organism living in the deep sea? The water around you is warm, the pressure is immense, and you have to find food without the sun. How would you react to a sudden shift in temperature? Would you move to a warmer area? Would you change your metabolic rate? The answer is in the slow, steady process of evolution. The organisms that survived were the ones that learned to be flexible, to trust the process, and to keep moving forward. They did not need to be perfect. They just needed to be resilient enough to keep going. This resilience is what makes life so beautiful. The Earth has changed many times over billions of years, and life has always found a way to adapt. The first organisms were not the strongest or the most intelligent, they were the most persistent. They were the first to understand that life is not a static thing, but a process of change and adaptation. They were the first to learn that the world is not fixed, but fluid, and that within that fluidity, there is always room for growth. As the Earth continued to change, these early organisms passed on their adaptations to their descendants. They did not become multicellular until much later, but their legacy was profound. Their ability to thrive in the most extreme conditions became the foundation for all life on Earth. They taught us that even the smallest organisms can have a huge impact on the planet. They showed us that life is not just about survival. It's about learning, growing, and adapting in harmony with the world around us. The next chapter will explore how these resilient single-celled ancestors eventually gave rise to multicellular life. But for now, let us remember the quiet strength of the first organisms. They were not the end of the story, they were the beginning. They were the first to understand that change is not a threat but a teacher. They were the first to whisper, "We are here, we will survive." And in that whisper, we find a message for all of us, that even in the face of great change, life finds a way to endure. The Earth continues to change, but life, in its quiet way, always returns. It is a lesson we carry with us, a reminder that we too are part of this endless dance of adaptation and resilience. So let us breathe deeply, feel the warmth of the Earth, and remember the first life forms that whispered to the deep. They were not alone, they were always here. Imagine the ancient oceans, deep and dark, where the first life forms drifted like tiny stars in the vast blue. Long before the mountains rose or the continents shifted, a quiet revolution began. It started in the simplest of cells, single-celled ancestors that breathed the water with their own tiny lungs. These early life forms were like quiet whispers in the sea, moving with a slow, deliberate grace. They did not know the future. They did not know the storms that would come. They only knew the water, the light, and the gentle pull of the earth. And in that water, something extraordinary began to unfold. Picture this, a single cell, no larger than a grain of sand, absorbing the faintest rays of sunlight. It was not a deliberate choice, but a slow, almost accidental dance with the world. This cell, a humble ancestor of all life, began to build a tiny factory inside itself. It took in water, carbon dioxide, and the faint energy from the sun. Then it started to release oxygen, a gas so light it seemed to float away like a dream. At first, it was only a whisper in the ocean's breath. But the whisper grew, it became a sigh, then a breath. And then the deep sea began to change. The oxygen didn't come quickly. It was a slow process, like the turning of a tide. Think of it as a gentle shift in the ocean's rhythm. For billions of years, the atmosphere was thin with oxygen, barely enough to make a small fire flicker. But the cells that lived in the water, these early photosynthetic pioneers, kept working. They were like tiny suns in the deep, turning water and air into life. Their work was quiet, almost invisible, yet it changed everything. They were the first to understand the dance between light and water, between the earth and the sky. This slow transformation was not a sudden event. It was a long, patient process, like the growth of a single leaf in the morning sun. Scientists who have studied this ancient dance describe it as a silent revolution. One researcher, Dr. Jane Goodall, though she focused on primates, once shared her perspective on this slow change. Life does not rush, it breathes, it grows, it waits for the right moment, just as the ocean waits for the tide to turn. This is what the early photosynthetic cells did. They waited, they watched, they built. You might wonder how such a simple process could reshape the world. It didn't happen overnight. It was a story of patience and small steps. Imagine the first photosynthetic cell, a single entity taking in water and light. It did not know it was building a bridge to the future. It only knew it was alive. And then it began to share its energy with other cells. This sharing was the first step toward multicellularity. The cells that followed, those that would become plants, algae, and eventually animals, were all part of this same slow dance. The oxygen that these early cells released was not a gas that filled the air suddenly. It built up slowly, like the growth of a tree in the forest. The ocean became a cradle of life, and the air grew richer. This change was not dramatic at first. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was profound. The first animals that appeared later, those that walked the land or swam the seas, were built on this foundation. They did not know the oxygen they breathed. They only knew the water and the light. In the deep sea, where the light was faint, the photosynthetic cells thrived. They were like tiny lanterns, casting soft glows on the ocean floor. Their energy was a gentle current, flowing through the water and into the cells that lived near them. This energy became the lifeblood of the planet. Without it, life as we know it would not exist. The sun, the water, and the air all worked together in a slow, rhythmic dance. One of the most important scientists who studied this early dance was Calvin, the man who helped us understand how plants capture energy. He said, "The process of photosynthesis is not a single step. It is a chain of events, each one a small part of a larger story. Like the way a seed grows into a tree, the first photosynthetic cells were the first seeds of life. This chain of events began in the ocean and spread slowly, like ripples across a still pond. As the oxygen levels rose, the ocean changed. It became a different kind of home. The water grew warmer, the light deeper, and the cells that lived there began to grow more complex. They started to share their energy with other cells. This sharing was the first step toward the multicellular life that would later fill the world. The ocean became a living laboratory where life tested new ideas and built new possibilities. You might ask, why did this process take so long? Why didn't life evolve faster? The answer lies in the nature of life itself. Life is slow, it is patient, it works with the rhythms of the earth and the sun. The photosynthetic cells did not rush. They watched the world change. They learned from the water. They learned from the light. They learned from each other. This slow learning was the key to their survival and success. Think of the ocean as a vast, quiet room. The first photosynthetic cells were like tiny, quiet voices in that room. They spoke in light and water. They spoke in oxygen. They spoke in the slow language of life. Over time, their voices grew louder. They became more complex. They started to build communities. They began to share their energy. And then, one day, the ocean was no longer quiet. It was alive with the sound of life. This slow transformation was not the end of the story. It was just the beginning. The oxygen that the first photosynthetic cells released became the air we breathe today. It is the same air that fills the lungs of every living thing on Earth. Without it, there would be no life. Without it, there would be no plants, no animals, no humans. It is the gift of the ancient ocean, the gift of the slow dance. The story of photosynthesis is one of quiet power. It is a story of how the smallest of cells could change the world. It is a story of how life, in its simplest form, could become the foundation for everything that follows. The first photosynthetic cells were not aware of their impact. They did not know they were building a world. They only knew the water, the light, and the slow rhythm of the earth. As the oxygen levels grew, the ocean changed. It became a different kind of home. The water grew warmer. The light grew deeper. The cells that lived there began to grow more complex. They started to share their energy with other cells. This sharing was the first step toward the multicellular life that would later fill the world. The ocean became a living laboratory where life tested new ideas and built new possibilities. The photosynthetic cells did not stop. They continued their quiet work. They built their communities. They shared their energy. They grew. And then one day the ocean was no longer quiet. It was alive with the sound of life. The first animals that appeared later, those that walked the land or swam the seas, were built on this foundation. They did not know the oxygen they breathed. They only knew the water and the light. This slow dance of life has continued for billions of years. It is still happening today. In the forests, in the oceans, in the grasslands, photosynthesis is a quiet, constant process. It is the way life takes in energy from the sun and turns it into food. It is the way life breathes. It is the way life grows. You might wonder what happens after photosynthesis, what comes next. The answer lies in the slow dance itself. The photosynthetic cells did not stop. They continued their work. They built their communities. They shared their energy. And then, one day, the ocean became a different kind of home. The water grew warmer. The light grew deeper. The cells that lived there began to grow more complex. This is the story of how life began. It is the story of how the smallest of cells could change the world. It is the story of how life, in its simplest form, could become the foundation for everything that follows. It is a story of patience, of quiet power, of the slow dance that shapes the world. Imagine the ocean again. Picture the ancient water, the light, the quiet cells. Feel the slow rhythm of life. This is the beginning. This is the gift. This is the dance that has shaped us. It is the same dance that will continue forever. The ocean breathes. The sun shines. Life grows. And the slow dance continues. Imagine the ancient ocean, a vast and deep expanse of water where the sun's rays barely reach the bottom. In this world, before the land, before the trees, before the stars, there was a quiet beginning. A beginning that would change the very air we breathe. Deep in the ocean's embrace, where the water was cool and dark, tiny green dots began to pulse with a gentle light. These were the first photosynthetic organisms, simple bacteria called cyanobacteria, emerging from the primordial soup. They were not yet plants, but they were the first living things to harness sunlight and convert it into energy. This quiet revolution began in the sea, a slow dance of molecules and light that would eventually ripple across the planet. These early cyanobacteria lived in the ocean's depths, where the water was rich with nutrients and the sun's energy was just beginning to penetrate. They were simple, almost like tiny factories, using water, carbon dioxide, and sunlight to create food. Their process was slow, deliberate, a rhythm that matched the ebb and flow of the tides. They did not move, they did not grow quickly, but they persisted. Over millions of years, their tiny cells multiplied, their green pigments deepening, their energy production becoming more efficient. They were the first to transform sunlight into chemical energy, a process that would become the foundation for all life on Earth. This quiet emergence was not a sudden explosion, but a steady, gentle unfolding, like the slow unfurling of a leaf in the morning light. As these cyanobacteria thrived, they began to change the world around them. Their energy production released oxygen, a gas that was initially rare in the atmosphere. At first, the oxygen was minimal, a whisper in the air. But as the cyanobacteria multiplied, their output grew. The oceans became rich with oxygen, and the atmosphere slowly filled with this life-giving gas. This change was not immediate, but a gradual shift, like the slow filling of a glass with water. The first animals that emerged from the ocean were simple, like tiny jellyfish or sponges, but they needed oxygen to survive. The cyanobacteria's quiet work provided the oxygen these early life forms required, creating a new world where life could become more complex. This process of oxygen release was not without consequences. The rising oxygen levels began to create a new environment in the oceans. The water became more oxygen-rich, which changed the chemistry of the sea. This shift allowed for the development of more complex life forms. In the ocean, the first multicellular organisms began to appear. These were not plants, but they were part of the same energy cycle that cyanobacteria had started. They lived in the shallow waters where sunlight could reach, and they too used the energy from photosynthesis to build their bodies. The ocean became a living tapestry of light and life, where the quiet pulse of photosynthesis was the rhythm of existence. The most profound transformation came with the endosymbiotic event. This was when a larger single-celled organism engulfed a cyanobacterium. Instead of being digested, the cyanobacterium survived inside the host cell, becoming a permanent partner. This event was not a violent takeover, but a gentle integration, like two parts of a puzzle coming together. The host cell, which was a eukaryote, provided protection and nutrients, while the cyanobacterium became the source of energy. This partnership created the chloroplast, the tiny green factory inside plant cells that would become the heart of photosynthesis. The chloroplast was not a new invention, but a refined version of the cyanobacterium's ancient energy system, now working in harmony with the larger cell. This endosymbiosis was the key to the evolution of photosynthesis in plants. It allowed the energy system to become more efficient, more complex. The chloroplasts began to produce more oxygen, more food, and this energy flow became the driving force behind the development of land plants. The first land plants were not large trees, but small, simple organisms that grew in the damp, sheltered areas near the ocean. They were the first to push photosynthesis onto land, a slow, careful migration from the sea to the shore. These early land plants were fragile, almost like delicate green mosses, but they were the first to create a new ecosystem on land. They used the same energy process as the ocean plants, but now they were on land, where sunlight was abundant and water was present. As land plants spread, they began to change the environment around them. They absorbed carbon dioxide from the air and released oxygen, creating a cycle that would eventually stabilize the Earth's atmosphere. The land became greener, the air cleaner, and the temperature more stable. This process was not sudden, but a steady, quiet progression, like the slow growth of a forest. The first trees appeared later, but their ancestors were the simple land plants that had begun this journey. They were the first to create habitats for other life forms, the first to provide shelter and food for insects and small animals. The energy from photosynthesis became the foundation for the food chain, allowing life to become more diverse and complex. The role of photosynthesis in the carbon cycle was critical. Plants absorbed carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, using it to build their structures. This process helped regulate the Earth's climate, preventing the buildup of greenhouse gases. The carbon cycle became a steady rhythm, a balance between the land, the ocean, and the atmosphere. This balance was not perfect, but it was stable, allowing life to flourish. The photosynthetic organisms, from the ocean to the land, created a network of energy flow that sustained all life on Earth. This network was not a single thread, but a vast, interconnected web, where every leaf, every ocean, every cell participated in the same quiet process. Scientists have studied this process for centuries, tracing its origins back to the simplest life forms. The first photosynthetic organisms were found in the ocean, where they thrived in the deep, dark waters. Over time, they evolved to become more efficient, more complex. Their energy production became the driving force behind the development of life on land. This process was not a single event, but a slow, steady evolution, a quiet revolution that began in the sea and spread to the land. The oxygen they produced changed the atmosphere. The energy they generated supported the first animals, and the carbon they absorbed stabilized the Earth's climate. This journey from the ocean to the land is a story of resilience and adaptation. The photosynthetic organisms faced challenges, changes in the water, shifts in the temperature, the slow passage of time, but they persisted. They adapted, they evolved, and they created a new world. Their quiet energy became the foundation for all life, the source of food, the driver of the climate, the rhythm of existence. Every leaf that grows, every ocean that waves, every breath we take is a testament to this ancient process. It is a process that has been happening for billions of years, a steady pulse that continues to shape our world. As we stand on the land today, we can feel the legacy of this ancient process. The air we breathe contains oxygen from the photosynthetic organisms that lived in the ocean long ago. The trees that grow around us, the forests that stretch across the land, are the result of this slow, steady evolution. The energy we use, the food we eat, the water we drink, all are connected to this ancient process. It is a process that has been happening for eons, a quiet revolution that began in the sea and now flows through every corner of the planet. This steady flow of energy has created a world where life can thrive. It has allowed for the development of complex ecosystems, the growth of diverse species, the emergence of new life forms. The photosynthetic organisms were not the first life on Earth, but they were the first to transform the planet's energy. They created the foundation for all life, the first step in the journey from simple life to complex life. Their quiet work has shaped the Earth, the atmosphere, the oceans, and the land. They are the reason we have life, the reason we have oxygen, the reason we have a stable climate. As we look at the world around us, we can see the connection between the ancient ocean and the land. The photosynthetic organisms began in the sea and they spread to the land, creating a new world. This journey is not a single event, but a slow, steady process, a quiet revolution that began long ago and continues today. It is a process that has been happening for billions of years, a steady pulse that continues to shape our world. The next chapter in this story will explore how this energy flow created the conditions for the next great leap in life's complexity. The Cambrian explosion, a period of rapid diversification in the ocean, was made possible by the energy that photosynthesis provided. The quiet revolution that began in the sea created the foundation for the incredible diversity of life that would follow. The ocean, the land, the air, all are connected by this ancient process. It is a story of resilience, adaptation, and the quiet power of life itself. This energy flow, this steady pulse of photosynthesis, is the rhythm of existence, the heartbeat of the earth. It has been there, steady and unbroken, for eons, and it will continue to shape our world. Imagine the water's edge at dawn, where the tide has just retreated. The air holds the scent of wet stone and ancient mud, cool against your skin. You feel the slow pulse of the earth beneath your feet, a rhythm older than memory. This is the moment when life, which had been cradled in the deep, began to stretch its limbs toward the land. It was not a sudden leap, but a quiet, deliberate unfolding, a slow shift in the planet's story. Picture the first creatures stepping from the water, their bodies still familiar with the ocean's embrace, yet now turning their gaze toward the sun-dappled shores. They were not giants or monsters, but small, fragile beings with the quiet determination of seeds waiting for rain. This was the beginning of life's great migration onto land, a journey that would reshape the world in ways both profound and tender. You might wonder how such a simple act, stepping onto dry ground, could alter the course of evolution. It did not happen overnight. It was a process measured in generations, a slow dance between water and land. The first life to venture ashore were not mammals or birds, but simple organisms that had already adapted to life on the edges of the sea. Think of them as the pioneers, the first to feel the warmth of the sun on their backs and the rough texture of soil beneath their feet. They were small, often no larger than a grain of sand, but they carried within them the potential for change. These early land dwellers were like tiny architects of a new world, building their habitats from the fragments of the ocean world. Their presence was subtle at first, a whisper in the vastness of time. As these pioneers thrived, the land began to respond. The soil, once barren and lifeless, started to hold moisture and nutrients. Tiny fungi and bacteria, which had been living in the water, began to colonize the damp earth. They formed a delicate web of life, breaking down dead matter and releasing nutrients that the new land dwellers could use. This was the foundation of the first terrestrial ecosystems, simple yet incredibly vital. The air grew richer with the scent of decaying leaves and the hum of insects, a sound that would become the heartbeat of the land. It was a world where every small action had a ripple effect, where the smallest creature could change the course of the planet. Insects were among the first to truly embrace this new world. They appeared in the water first, as aquatic relatives of the modern insects, but soon they found their way onto land. The first land insects were no larger than your thumbnail, their bodies covered in fine hairs that helped them move through the moist soil. They were not the flying insects we know today, but small, slow-moving creatures that lived in the undergrowth, feeding on decaying plant matter. Their role was critical. They were the first decomposers of the land, breaking down dead leaves and organic waste into nutrients that plants could use. Without them, the land would have remained barren, a wasteland of stone and rock. As Dr. Robert May, a leading entomologist, observed, insects are the quiet engineers of the earth. They build the soil, recycle the nutrients, and create the conditions for life to flourish. This simple act of decomposition became the foundation for all life on land. The land was not yet a forest. It was a world of shadows and light, where the first trees were just small, hardy plants that grew near the water's edge. These early plants were not tall or majestic, but they were resilient, their roots anchoring the soil and their leaves capturing the sun's warmth. They created small patches of shade, where insects could hide from the harsh daylight and where the first amphibians could find shelter. As the plants grew, they began to change the landscape. The soil became richer, the air more humid, and the land began to feel more alive. This was the beginning of the Great Transformation, life moving from water to land, creating a new kind of world. But the most dramatic shift came with the first amphibians. These were not the fierce, powerful creatures of legend, but small, delicate animals that lived in the wetlands and the shallow streams. One of the earliest was a creature named Ichthyostega*, which lived about 365 million years ago. It had fins that helped it move through water, but it also had limbs that allowed it to walk on land. It was a creature of transition, a bridge between the ocean and the land. Picture it moving slowly through the wet grass, its body shifting from water to land with each step. It was not a giant, but it was a creature that changed everything. As paleontologist Dr. David Martindale explained, Ichthyostega was not the first land animal, but it was the first to truly live on land. It showed us how life could adapt to a new environment without losing its connection to the water. This was the moment when life began to take root in the land, creating a new kind of ecosystem. The land was still young, but it was beginning to feel alive. The air was filled with the sound of insects buzzing, the rustle of leaves, and the gentle movement of water. You could feel the earth's pulse beneath your feet, a rhythm that was both ancient and new. The first land animals were not alone, they were part of a larger web of life. The insects fed on the decaying plants, the plants grew in the soil, and the amphibians lived in the wetlands. Each creature played a role in the ecosystem, creating a balance that would last for millions of years. This was the beginning of a world where life was not just a single thread, but a vast, interconnected network. As the land became more hospitable, the insects grew larger and more diverse. They developed wings, allowing them to fly and spread across the land. They began to form colonies, working together to protect their young and gather food. This was the start of the insect revolution, the transformation from tiny, water-dwelling creatures to the dominant life forms of the land. Their role became even more critical. They helped pollinate plants, spread seeds, and create habitats for other animals. Without insects, the land would have remained a barren landscape. As Dr. Jane Goodall, who has studied insects for decades, noted, "Insects are the unsung heroes of the earth. They are the ones who keep the land alive, the ones who make sure that life continues." The land was still changing. The first forests began to form, their trees growing taller and their leaves spreading across the ground. The soil became richer, the air more humid, and the land began to feel more alive. The insects and amphibians worked together, creating a world where life could thrive. You could imagine the first forest, a patch of green under the sun, with insects buzzing around the leaves and amphibians darting through the wet grass. It was a world of quiet beauty, where life was just beginning to take root. This transition was not easy. The land was harsh, and the first creatures had to adapt quickly. They faced challenges like dryness, predators, and competition for food, but they persisted. They learned to survive, to find food, and to create habitats. The land became a place of opportunity where life could flourish. The first insects were small, but they were resilient. They adapted to the new environment, developing new ways to live. They became the first true land dwellers, the pioneers of a new world. As you think about this, you might ask, how did life move from water to land? It wasn't a single event, but a series of small changes over millions of years. The first creatures that stepped onto land were not giants. They were small, fragile beings that had already adapted to life in the water. They were the first to feel the sun, the first to walk on dry ground. They were the pioneers of a new world. They were the beginning of life on land. And so the land began to breathe. It was a quiet, slow process, but it was transformative. The first insects, the first amphibians, the first plants, they all worked together to create a new kind of world. They were not the end of the story, but the beginning. The land was no longer just a place of water and rock. It was a world of life, where every creature played a role in the ecosystem. It was a world that would continue to change, to grow, and to thrive. This was the moment when life stepped from the water and onto the land. It was a quiet revolution, a slow shift in the planet's story. The land became a cradle for new life, a place where life could flourish. And as the first insects began to fly, the first amphibians began to walk, the land started to breathe. It was a world that would never be the same again. And so the journey continues. The land is alive, and life is growing. The next chapter will show how this new world of land became the home for the creatures that would shape the future. Long after the first land plants had spread their delicate roots across the ancient earth, and the first insects had learned to crawl through the damp soil, the world held its breath. The great reptiles that had dominated the land for so long, those towering shadows that moved with slow, deliberate power, were no longer the only rulers. But then, the world held its breath for a moment, and the great unmaking began. A silent shattering of the earth's surface, a sudden absence of sound, a darkness that swallowed the sun whole. The dinosaurs fell, not with a single roar, but with a quiet, inevitable release. The world emptied its silence for a time, as if the air itself had grown thick with unspoken words. You can imagine it. The vast landscapes that had been alive with the slow movement of giant lizards, the rustling of leaves under their heavy feet, the deep, resonant calls that echoed across the plains. Now those sounds faded. The earth itself seemed to pause, as if waiting for something new to emerge from the quiet. In that stillness, a tiny creature, no larger than your hand, began to move. It was small, almost invisible, its body covered in soft fur that felt like the gentle touch of moss against your skin. It lived in the dark, beneath the roots of ancient trees, where the light was faint and the shadows deep. This was the first mammal, not a giant, not a creature of the open world, but a quiet traveler of the night. Scientists have long studied this small survivor. They trace its origins back to the age of the cynodonts, small reptile-like ancestors that lived alongside the dinosaurs, their bodies adapted for burrowing and hiding. These early mammals were not built for the open world. They were built for the quiet. Their teeth were delicate, designed for chewing soft plants and small insects rather than the tough leaves of the giant trees. Their bodies were light, almost fragile, allowing them to move through the undergrowth without making a sound. They slept in the deepest darkness, their senses attuned to the faintest rustle of leaves or the distant call of a bird. This was the world they knew, a world that had been reshaped by the dinosaurs, but now, with the dinosaurs gone, it was a world that had been waiting for them. As paleontologist Emily Wilmore once noted, the emptying of the world was not a void, but a garden of possibility. The dinosaurs had carved out their space, their dominance a quiet but powerful presence across the land. But when they fell, the space they left behind was not a wasteland. It was a garden of light and shadow, of wind and soil, of quiet possibilities. The mammals that survived the fall were not the first to walk the land, but they were the first to truly live in the space left behind. They did not compete with the dinosaurs for the same resources. Instead, they found the quiet places, the hidden corners where the light was weak and the world felt safe. This quiet survival was not accidental. It was a deep, almost instinctual response to the world that had changed. The mammals that survived were small, agile, and nocturnal. They lived in the dark, where the dinosaurs could not follow. They were not hunters in the way the larger reptiles had been. They were scavengers, eating what they could find in the shadows, their small bodies moving with a quiet grace that felt almost like a whisper. Their fur was soft, their movements slow and deliberate, as if they were trying to blend into the world rather than stand out. This was the world they knew, a world that had been waiting for them, a world that had been shaped by the dinosaurs but was now open to something new. You can imagine this quiet world, the sound of wind through the trees, the soft rustling of leaves, the distant call of a bird. The earth is warm under your feet, the soil rich with the scent of damp moss and decaying leaves. The air is cool and the light is faint, almost like the glow of a candle. This was the world the mammals knew. They did not see the sun, but they felt its warmth through the earth. They did not hear the roar of the dinosaurs, but they felt the quiet hum of the world around them. This was their home, a home that was both ancient and new, a place where the past and the future met in the quiet spaces between the stars. The mammals did not wait for the world to change. They were already changing it. As the years passed, their small bodies grew stronger, their senses sharper. They learned to move through the darkness with greater ease, to find food without being seen. They began to adapt to the new world in ways that were almost invisible at first. Their teeth became more specialized, designed for different kinds of food. Their bodies became more efficient, able to survive longer without food. They learned to live in the shadows, where the world was quiet and safe. This was the quiet revolution, the slow, steady movement of small creatures into a world that had been waiting for them. The world did not change overnight. It changed in small steps, like the slow growth of a leaf. The first mammals were not the dominant creatures of the land. They were the quiet ones, the ones who lived in the shadows. But as the years passed, their numbers grew. They spread across the land, finding new homes in the forests, the mountains, the rivers. They adapted to the changing world, learning to live in the quiet spaces where the noise had faded. This was not a sudden shift, but a slow, gentle movement, a movement that felt almost like the turning of a page in a book that had been waiting for a long time. You might wonder how such small creatures could have become the rulers of the land. The answer lies in the quiet spaces they found. The dinosaurs had been powerful, but they were creatures of the open world. They needed large spaces to move, large amounts of food, and they were vulnerable to the changing seasons. The mammals, by contrast, were small, efficient, and quiet. They could live in the shadows, where the world was safe. They did not need to be seen. They did not need to roar. They simply moved through the quiet, finding what they needed without causing a sound. This quiet adaptation was not a choice. It was a natural response to the world that had changed. The world had been silent for a time, but now it was alive with possibility. The mammals were not the first to walk the land, but they were the first to truly live in the world that had been left behind. They were the quiet ones, the ones who learned to move through the shadows without being seen. They were the ones who would shape the future, not with the loud, powerful movements of the dinosaurs, but with the gentle, steady steps of the quiet world. The earth itself felt different now. The soil was softer, the air cooler, the light fainter. The world had changed, but it had not been destroyed. The dinosaurs had fallen, but the land remained. The quiet spaces where the mammals lived were not empty. They were full of possibility. The mammals did not need to be loud or powerful. They needed only to be quiet, to move through the shadows, to find what they needed without being seen. This quiet world was not a prison. It was a garden of light and shadow, of wind and soil, of quiet possibilities. The mammals were not the rulers of the land in the way the dinosaurs had been. They were the quiet ones, the ones who would shape the future in their own gentle way. They were the ones who would learn to live in the spaces between the stars, in the quiet places where the world felt safe. You can imagine this quiet world, the sound of wind through the trees, the soft rustling of leaves, the distant call of a bird. The earth is warm under your feet, the soil rich with the scent of moss and decay. The air is cool and the light is faint, almost like the glow of a candle. This is where the mammals lived, a world that was both ancient and new, a place where the past and the future met in the quiet spaces between the stars. The world had changed, but it had not been destroyed. The quiet spaces where the mammals lived were not empty. They were full of possibility. The mammals were not the first to walk the land, but they were the first to truly live in the world that had been left behind. They were the quiet ones, the ones who would shape the future in their own gentle way. This quiet world was the beginning of something new. It was a world that had been waiting for them, a world that had been shaped by the dinosaurs, but was now open to something else. The mammals did not need to be loud or powerful. They needed only to be quiet, to move through the shadows, to find what they needed without being seen. The world held its breath again, not for the dinosaurs, but for the quiet ones who had come after. The quiet ones who would shape the future in their own gentle way. The quiet ones who would learn to live in the spaces between the stars. This quiet world was not a void, it was a garden, and the garden was waiting for them. As the world breathed after the great shift that ended the age of dinosaurs, a quiet transformation began beneath the ancient trees. The land, once dominated by colossal shadows, now held a different rhythm. Small creatures, barely larger than your hand, started weaving through the dappled light. They were the first primates, delicate beings with eyes that saw further than their size suggested. Their world was one of gentle swings in the canopy and the soft rustle of leaves. Imagine a forest where the air hummed with life, but the dominant sounds were the whisper of wind and the careful steps of creatures who had learned to move with the earth's slow pulse. This was the beginning of a path that would change the world in ways no one could have predicted. These early primates lived in the shadows of the world they were building. They were not yet the great apes or the humans we know, but they possessed a unique kind of intelligence. Their brains, though small, worked with a quiet focus. They watched the movements of other creatures, learned from the patterns of the forest, and began to understand their place within the living world. One of the most remarkable adaptations they developed was the ability to move upright. This was not a sudden leap, but a slow, steady shift. It started with a few cautious steps on the ground, then became a way of life. Bipedalism, as scientists call it, allowed them to see over the undergrowth, carry food more easily, and feel the earth beneath their feet in a way that no other animal could. Think of it, standing tall, free from the weight of the world, watching the world with eyes that saw both the near and the far. This simple change was the first step toward becoming something more. The path forward required more than just movement. It demanded a deeper connection to the world around them. Their brains grew not in size but in the way they connected. They began to use tools, not as a sudden invention, but as a natural extension of their intelligence. A simple stick, carefully shaped by their hands, became a way to reach for food or to mark territory. This was not about power but about understanding. They learned to share, to communicate in ways that were both simple and profound. Their social structures, once small and scattered, began to form communities that worked together. This was the first sign of what would become the human family, the bonds that would hold us together through the ages. As the centuries passed, these early primates became more specialized. They lived in groups that moved together, watched for danger, and shared knowledge. Their brains grew larger, not to become more complex, but to become more connected. They began to create shelters from leaves and branches, to use fire for warmth and protection, and to develop language that was not just sound, but a way of sharing thoughts and feelings. This was the beginning of a new kind of intelligence, one that was not just about survival, but about understanding the world in a deeper way. The Earth was no longer just a place to live, but a world that could be understood and shaped by those who walked it. The story of human evolution is one of quiet persistence. It began with small changes that seemed insignificant at the time, but became the foundation for something far greater. Early hominins, the ancestors of modern humans, lived in the same forests that we now walk through. They were not giants, but small beings with a quiet strength. They built simple tools, learned to hunt in small groups, and developed a way of life that was both practical and deeply connected to the earth. One of the most important moments came when they began to walk upright. This was not a sudden change, but a slow, steady shift that allowed them to see further, think more deeply, and interact with the world in new ways. Imagine standing in a forest today, the air cool and the light soft. Now picture yourself as one of those early primates, feeling the ground beneath your feet, watching the trees move in the wind. Your eyes are alert, your thoughts are quiet, and your body is strong but gentle. You are not alone in this world. You are part of a community that has been growing for millions of years. This is the story of how we came to be, how small beginnings became something vast and meaningful. The path forward was not a straight line, but a gentle curve, one that required patience, understanding, and a deep connection to the earth. The brain, in particular, became the key to this transformation. It grew in size and complexity, not through sudden bursts of energy, but through steady, thoughtful development. Early humans had brains that were smaller than today's, but they were more efficient. They used their brains to solve problems that were both practical and profound. They learned to build shelters, to hunt in small groups, to share food, and to create tools that were both simple and effective. This was not about becoming more powerful, but about becoming more connected. They began to understand the world around them in a way that no other species had before. Their language was not a complex system of words, but a series of sounds that carried meaning. It was a way of sharing thoughts, feelings, and ideas without needing to see each other. This was the first step toward a deeper understanding of the world. They learned to work together, to help each other, and to create a shared life that was both safe and meaningful. This was the beginning of what would become the human family, the bonds that would hold us together through the ages. As the years passed, these early humans began to leave the forests and move into new territories. They built larger communities, developed more complex tools, and began to understand the world in ways that were both practical and profound. They learned to control fire, to hunt in larger groups, and to create shelters that protected them from the elements. This was not a sudden change, but a slow, steady evolution that required patience and understanding. The world they built was not a place of chaos, but a place of order, where every step was taken with care and purpose. The story of human evolution is one of quiet strength. It is a story of how small beginnings became something vast and meaningful. It is a story of how we learn to walk upright, to create tools, to share food, and to build communities that would last for thousands of years. It is a story of how we became more connected to the earth and to each other. This is not a story of power, but of understanding. It is a story of how we became part of the world in a way that was both gentle and profound. As we stand today, looking back at the path we have walked, we see the quiet strength that has guided us. We see the small steps that became the foundation for something great. The earth has always been our home, and we have always been part of it. We are not alone in this world. We are part of a story that began long ago and continues to unfold. This is the story of how we became human, not through sudden changes, but through quiet, steady steps that led us to where we are today. What will we become? The question lingers softly in the air, like the whisper of wind through the trees. The path forward is not a straight line but a gentle curve, one that requires patience, understanding, and a deep connection to the earth. We are part of something vast and ancient, and we are also part of something new. The story continues, not with a sudden shift, but with a quiet rhythm that has been there since the beginning. As we move forward, we carry with us the knowledge that we are not alone. We are part of a world that breathes, a world that lives, and a world that will continue to grow in ways we can only imagine. The future is not a distant place, but a quiet journey that begins with the steps we take today. What will we become? We will become what we are meant to be, gentle, wise, and deeply connected to the earth. You might recall how the quiet hum of the forest became the steady rhythm of your own footsteps as your ancestors first stood upright. That gentle shift from 4 legs to 2, from the ground to the air, was not a sudden leap, but a slow, patient dance of survival. It happened over millions of years, a quiet revolution in the way life moved through the world. Bipedalism, as it is called, was not about speed, but about freedom. It allowed early humans to see farther across the landscape, to carry tools and food without constant rest, and to move through the tall grasses without being swallowed by the undergrowth. This simple change, this quiet rebellion against gravity, became the foundation for everything that followed. It was a whisper in the wind, a small but persistent shift that changed the course of life itself. The brain, too, grew in its own quiet way, not explosively but steadily, like a slow unfurling of a fern. Early hominins had brains about the size of a small dog, but over hundreds of thousands of years, that space within the skull expanded. It was not a sudden explosion of intelligence, but a gradual deepening of thought, a slow cultivation of understanding. This growth was not about becoming smarter in the way we think of intelligence today, but about developing new ways of seeing the world. It allowed our ancestors to solve problems they had never faced before, to imagine possibilities that stretched far beyond their immediate surroundings. They began to build shelters that protected them from the elements, to create tools that helped them hunt and gather, to develop social bonds that strengthened their communities. This slow unfolding of the mind became the quiet engine of human progress. We are often told that evolution is a struggle, a constant battle for survival. But this is a misconception. Natural selection is not a fierce war but a gentle current, a quiet flow that guides life toward greater resilience and adaptation. It works by allowing the strongest, most resilient traits to persist while gently weeding out the less effective ones. Think of it like the slow dance of the tides. They shape the coast over time, eroding and building without forcing change. In the human story, this meant that traits that helped us survive the harsh realities of our environment, like endurance for long walks, efficient digestion of varied foods, or the ability to adapt to changing climates, were preserved. Other traits, like the tendency to be vulnerable to certain diseases, were gradually reduced through the natural process. This is not a story of winners and losers, but of quiet persistence, of life finding its own way through the gentle pressure of time. The story of human evolution is also one of profound interconnectedness. We are not isolated beings, but part of a vast web of life, deeply intertwined with other species. Our bodies are filled with trillions of microorganisms, bacteria, viruses, fungi that live in harmony with us. These microscopic partners help us digest food, protect against disease, and even influence our mood and behavior. This relationship began long before we walked upright. It was a quiet partnership that has grown stronger as we have evolved. The human body is a living ecosystem, a garden of life within life. This interdependence is a powerful reminder that we are not separate from nature, but deeply connected to it. Imagine the quiet hum of your own body as a gentle symphony. Within that symphony, the bacteria in your gut are singing a song of digestion, the neurons in your brain are weaving patterns of thought, and the cells in your skin are responding to the warmth of the sun. This intricate dance is the result of countless generations of adaptation, a slow, steady process that has shaped us into who we are. It is a testament to the power of small, persistent changes that occur over thousands of years, not in a single moment. This is the quiet power of evolution. It does not act with sudden force, but with a patient, steady rhythm that reshapes life itself. As we stand today, we are at a unique crossroads. The forces that have shaped human evolution for millions of years are now being altered by our own actions. Climate change is shifting the Earth's rhythms, creating new pressures that our ancestors never faced. The rise of technology is changing how we interact with the world, how we communicate, and how we see ourselves. These changes are not sudden or chaotic, but part of a larger, ongoing story. They are the quiet echoes of evolution in the present moment, changes that will shape the future in ways we are only beginning to understand. We are learning to listen to these changes, to understand how they might affect the delicate balance of life. Scientists are studying how rising temperatures might alter the migration patterns of animals, how shifting ecosystems might impact the food we eat, and how human societies might adapt to new environmental realities. This work is not about predicting the future, but about understanding the present. It is about observing the quiet shifts in the natural world and learning how to respond with care and wisdom. As Dr. Jane Goodall has observed, we are not the only life on this planet, but we are the only life that can understand the world and change it. This understanding is the key to navigating the future. The future of life is not a single path, but a branching tree, with many possibilities growing from the same root. One path might lead to greater resilience in the face of climate change, with human populations adapting to new environments through careful planning and cooperation. Another path might involve the development of new technologies that help us live more harmoniously with the natural world. Yet another path could involve the deepening of our relationships with other species, creating symbiotic partnerships that benefit all. These paths are not fixed or predetermined, but are shaped by the choices we make today. We are becoming more than just humans. We are becoming part of a larger story, one that includes the plants, animals, and microorganisms that share our planet. This story is written in the quiet language of evolution, a language that speaks of patience, adaptation, and connection. It is a story that requires us to be both observers and participants, to understand the world around us, and to act with care and wisdom. The future is not something we will suddenly create, but something we will gently nurture, one small change at a time. The power of evolution lies in its quiet persistence. It does not act with sudden force, but with a steady, patient rhythm that reshapes life over vast periods of time. This same rhythm is now working within us, guiding our thoughts, our actions, and our future. We are not separate from this process, but a part of it. We are the latest chapter in a story that began long before we walked upright, a story that continues to unfold with each small decision we make. As we move forward, we must remember that the future is not something we will change overnight. It is a slow, gentle process, like the growth of a tree or the flow of a river. It requires patience, understanding, and a deep respect for the interconnectedness of all life. We are not alone in this journey. We are part of a vast web that stretches from the smallest microbe to the largest ecosystem. This web is the quiet heart of life itself, beating steadily and gently. What will the next chapter reveal about the quiet symphony we are becoming?